Welcome to the Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic text adventure games. I am Jason Compton, joined by regular retro adventurer this episode, Dave Hawkins. Dave, how you doing?
I'm not too badly, Jason. Thanks very much.
And we have a guest retro adventurer on this episode, Iain Lee, an old bloke who was popular in the 90s, he tells us, currently the host of about 37 podcasts, including Iain Lee's Random Access Memories, and notably one of the first people out there to give us a shout-out. Actually, he was the second on This Week in Retro to give us a shout-out, which was what made me personally aware of you out there, Iain. So.
Yeah. Go on, I interrupted. I interrupt a lot. I apologize. Go on, finish what you were saying. I'm so sorry.
So, appreciate the attention. Glad we got a chance to meet, and appreciate your interest in coming on the show with us.
Listen, I'm a big fan of old computer games, primarily, right? From the sort of early to mid '80s is my period, and I'm kind of dipping my toe in the retro. I write for Retro Game. I have done for a while, actually. This Week in Retro is a podcast I absolutely love, and I've been lucky enough to be on it a few times. And then I discovered your podcast, and I thought, wow, there are people mad enough to do a podcast about text adventures, right? And I have a relationship with text adventures, and we'll dig a little deeper into it. Oh man, I love it. I love your show so much. I think text adventures get overlooked in the history of gaming because everyone likes consoles and everyone likes, hedgehogs that run fast and stuff.
Plumbers, those types.
Yeah, they love the plot. I've just now got an image of like an arcade machine in 1984 with a text adventure in, and every time you die, you got to put another 20 pence in. But I think they're grossly overlooked, because it's not cool. You don't see many YouTubers. My kids find out about all the old games from me, but from YouTubers, and you don't see many YouTubers going, right, we're going to play Colossal Cave today, and stuff like that. So hearing your show, and I know you have a rotation of hosts, and it was lovely to hear you all back together again a couple of weeks ago. And hearing people talk about it with such passion and knowledge and willingness to learn more and to try stuff that might be good, might be a little bit rubbish because some of these games aren't very good. It's a real joy. And I'm a huge fan, and I get very excited when it pops up saying there's a new episode. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. And you're right. Text adventures are not big news in the 21st century. So when there is a little news, for example, in late January, there was a little bit of a pop in coverage for the somewhat forgotten Beetle Quest, which came out in the mid 80s. It was a tape load.
Yeah.
And, we discussed it internally. Is this news? Was this really a lost game? Was this just a slow news day on the culture sites? But the fact is it got people talking about these games again. And that to us is a good type of news.
And I'm a huge Beatles fan. I had not heard of that. I mean, it sounds flipping awful, but I was intrigued by that, and that's the kind of thing I'd go and have a little look at. So I think it's nice when these things get mentioned. There is a danger. History is written by the victors, and the victors are Mario and Sonic and those kind of things. And there is a danger that this stuff, which I think is culturally important, gets lost. Because it hasn't got fancy pictures, hasn't got, this stuff can get lost. And I think it's important that we remind people this exists. Hopefully some new people will go and have a look. Hopefully people like me who used to play this stuff and kind of forgotten about them get a new renewed passion for them.
Yeah, that is what we're hoping to instill. You mentioned the idea of an arcade-based adventure game. There was, and I've had a tough time finding proof of this, but there was definitely a coin-op. I think it was an Apple II embedded. You could find these at like Showbiz Pizza. So you could play like a lemonade stand for a few minutes on a coin. I'm not joking. It was definitely out there. It was definitely a thing. So I wouldn't be too shocked if a Zork or Colossal Cave or something actually had found its way in there. If anybody out there knows exactly what I'm talking about, because I have not in the past 30 years been able to hit on quite the right search term to find this, but it was definitely a thing that existed, at least in the US.
I can imagine it could well be a Japanese version of something like that. That's something they would definitely have done.
So, as you know, those of you familiar with the show, on the Retro Adventures, we typically do an appetizer course and a main course. And our guest this episode, he suggested both of those games. So the first one we're going to take on is Calixto Island. Calixto Island was released by Mark Data Products on an intriguing relatively small roster of platforms: TRS-80, Dragon, and MS-DOS between 1981 and 1984. Originally a text-based game with later animated graphics, which were not out of place for the time among things like Interplay titles, Mind Shadow, and Tracer Sanction, as previously covered on the show. This was not a game that I had encountered before, and we've talked a little bit about how a lot of my exposure to games came from the text, The Book of Adventure Games, which was written by an Apple-focused author. This not being on Apple, I have a feeling that's one of the reasons I never encountered it. Iain, where did you first come across Calixto?
Well, I had a Dragon 32, and I remember the excitement of me and my sister were allowed to stay up late one night because Dad was coming home with something. And he brought a Dragon 32, and I've tried to explain this to my teenage boys. It's impossible to convey how exciting it was plugging a machine into a TV, tuning it in, and being able to type words on the television. You know, we'd seen Pong and stuff like that, but actually having a cursor and type stuff and words come up, I can just remember the thrill of it that night. Now, the Dragon 32 was not a great machine. I know that. However, it was my first computer, and I've got one, and I love it. I've got so much passion for it. I think it looks beautiful. I think the keyboard is amazing, and I got bullied at school for having a Dragon 32 in the same way I got bullied at school for having Betamax over VHS.
It's a harsh life.
The 80s were tough, man.
They were.
And it's really interesting. I had Calixto Island, and I had suggested a previous game, another game, Madness and the Minotaur, which I remember more. But then it came back that you looked at it and it had terrible reviews. Well, I'm wondering what the reviews were for Calixto Island, because I was very confused because I was trying to find it online, and there's not much online. And all I could find were I guess it's the TRS-80 version with graphics. And
that's the DOS version.
That's the DOS version, right? Okay, because I was thinking this didn't have graphics. This was the green Dragon 32 screen with the black text, and then I managed to find. Oh my God! It was what a color to be staring at. So I was a bit confused at that, but then I kind of did some reading up. I remembered what it was. How did I get it? I don't know. In that mysterious way that we would just have games. I remember it was an original copy. It wasn't a dodgy copy from someone, because I remember the white cassette with the red writing. And I'll be honest, I found text adventures, this and Madness, and I found them terrifying, and I don't quite know why. There was something very eerie about this screen and about entering this world where it's sort of someone is describing stuff. You're in a room. There is a roll-top desk. There is a rug. I would have been 9 years old, and for some reason, kids get freaked out by odd things. It used to scare me. You could type, I can't remember, go stairs, and suddenly you were in a dark attic. There is a chest. It used to freak me out, that kind of thing. So
everything's frightening in that radioactive Dragon/TRS-80 setup.
I was going to say that.
and in a sense, there is a way in which, especially that you are or I am, text adventures could be seen as kind of a body horror experience, because you try to give what seem to be perfectly normal commands. Says, I can't do that. And you get enough of those, like, why don't I have control of my limbs, my feet? Why can't I pick up this object? Why can't I open that door? So yeah, there's a body horror story there. Dave, had you had any experience with Calixto Island before, a couple weeks ago?
No, not at all. It was the first time I'd actually ever heard of it. And we'll probably cover this in a bit, but I really did want to play the Dragon 32 version, because that was the one that Iain first mentioned, but the only working copy I could actually find was for DOS. Yeah. So I think we're going to have to sort of compare Iain's memories here with the DOS version, unless, of course, you, Jason, managed to actually find a Dragon 32 version or a TRS-80 version.
I played the DOS version, and I was really happy about that, which I'll get into in a little bit. Just to set the stage for this game, we are not talking about a deep, rich world of feelies and storytelling here. This is your object in this game is to find a treasure and return it to its rightful place. There's the tagline. That's what you need to know. Mechanically, it is a 4-word parser, which basically I found satisfactory, especially in the little zapping back and forth bit that we'll get into in a little while. You start in a house. This house has curious geography because there doesn't seem to be a way to get into or out of the house. You're in a study with that desk, but there's really no way to get out to the outside world. You end up finding a secret tunnel that leads you to a teleportation machine, but there's not an outside world per se. But yes, the idea, which in a way was kind of a look ahead actually to games like Task Times and Tone Town, where there's this sort of eccentric character that has been exploring another world, and then they're missing, and the work that they were doing is missing, and you're trying to put the pieces together right down to the ticking clock on the wall. Ian, did you play the DOS version by way of refreshing yourself?
I did play the DOS version, and I didn't like it because I remember it so fondly being that text, and everything was in my head. And suddenly playing the version with pictures, it made it easier. You know, for me, it took away some of a significant amount of the mystery and of the tension, because suddenly that room you find yourself in doesn't look that creepy. Suddenly the attic, it's not that creepy an attic. When it was just the text, and I was 9 or 10 years old, that was when it became creepy. So I did play it. The graphics reminded me a bit of the BBC version of Spy versus Spy that had that kind of vibe to it. So I didn't go into much detail playing it. I played it a bit. I had some fun. I remembered as a kid, I found that this is part of my problem with text. I found them so difficult, right? My brain doesn't work in that way. I enjoyed them. I got pleasure from them as a kid. But my brain is not great at solving puzzles. It's good at doing other things, but not that. And I was playing it, and I knew I had to look under the rug, and I couldn't work, even though it's a 4-word parser, which is pretty generous. I struggled to do that. So I did play around with it. I find games where you've got to do the same thing twice to move something on, I find those a little bit naughty. You've got to look at, I think it's the cabinet or the shelves.
This game had that a few times, yeah.
I don't like that. I don't like that. It happens in other games, but I don't think it's a particularly common trope, is it?
I wouldn't say so. No, I mean, you are right. You have to examine things more than once, and you can't always guarantee that you haven't missed something, and you find yourself repeating the same commands just in case.
Yeah.
But no, normally, and funnily enough, Jess and I were talking about this with another game earlier today.
On an episode that will appear in the future.
Yeah, on an episode that will indeed
Time
appear in
travel.
the future. Yep, another time travel story. But no, it is fairly uncommon. I think normally you would get, if you examine something, you would either see everything or you would get a clue. So, I mean, how did you sort of find that, Jason? I think that's definitely, as Ian pointed out, unusual.
Yeah, it was a double searcher, which, you, at the same time, you understand why they did it. You go like, yeah, maybe you didn't have to do that, because yes, you need to look at things multiple times to find multiple objects in them. Like there's the cabinet. I did find that I was more thrown by the fact that certain things, particularly the manual for the elaborate machine, you get different results reading it based on where you are. If you are outside the machine, it just tells you what it is. If you're inside the machine, it explains it, which seemed like a curious choice for a game that, in a lot of other ways, seemed to have, if not lavish, fairly tight writing. They sort of knew what they were trying to express and did so. As much as I scoffed at things like, it's just a common pagan idol, my comment, you're being like, like they have at Tesco, just your pagan idols. Having that kind of odd behavior, whereas the double searching, I'm sure, was intentional. Like, aha, we're gonna make you go at it multiple times. But then at the same time, sometimes the game basically telegraphed exactly what you had to do. The boat is leaking. Maybe I should, all caps, bail water. Like, they're just telling you straight out, this is how you need to solve this puzzle. So that I thought was odd.
It's a small game, isn't it? I read there's something like only 28 locations or something. It's not huge.
Yeah, it's not a sprawling world. It's more about the puzzle density. There's definitely some inventory management because you can only carry four things. Speaking of four, I'd said four-word parser earlier. I meant four-letter parser.
Four-letter, that's it, yes.
You very faithfully repeated me, but I said it wrong. It's a four-letter
You're
parser.
the expert. I'm doing whatever you say. But I did actually find the parser... Sometimes they can be a real pain in the butt. I thought this one was quite user-friendly. Overall,
Yes. There were a couple of areas where I wanted for synonyms a little bit, but I definitely appreciated, and this will sort of shades for our upcoming game. The four-letter parser meant that in the machine, the teleportation machine, you could just press but.
Yeah, there we go.
I mean, the one thing that I did notice actually when we were talking about the parser is the directions were slightly odd. There was a huge number of cases where, for example, you had to go passage, and the only way to get out the passage was south, but you couldn't go north to get back into that passage. You had to go stairs, but you could go down the stairs, go cellar, but then you could get up to go back up. And I thought that was an unusual choice.
Going back to what you said about I think it was only 4 things you could hold. I hate that. Because it's like, okay, well, I've dropped the spectacles here, and then I need to go back. It's the chicken, the fox, and the grain, isn't it? Trying to get it across the river, and I just think, come on, give me a backpack. Come on, let me put stuff in there. I don't want to have to go back and then get the spectacles or whatever else it is. So that stuff frustrates me. Now, as a 10-year-old kid, that at that point I probably would have switched it off. As a 51-year-old. Gentlemen, I have a little bit more patience for that kind of stuff. Saying that, I didn't play this to completion.
Well, you could load up the time machine and just put everything in there and it travelled with you. So, I mean, there was that sort of option. But, it was annoying. I mean, when you're carrying a rug and a box, and you think, okay, they could be fairly hefty. But when you're carrying a pair of spectacles and a bicycle pump, I'd have thought maybe a few more objects.
You put spectacles on your face. That means your hands are free. Pump in the pocket. You've still got hands free. Come on, guys.
And you can wear the boots,
And Infocom in some games would try to address this by assigning weight to objects, and so you could carry more fluff than you could anvils, but that has its own frustrations too. At least the 4 limit, although arbitrary, you can at least it's predictable. I did note the Scott Adams tip because again this is about finding that treasure and putting it back. When you do find Montezuma's jeweled crown, it is surrounded in asterisks, which was the old Scott Adams style of indicating a treasure. And indeed, you take it back to the starting location. It's another, as we will discuss in the future, this is another game where the starting location is also where the adventure ends. It says the adventure is over. 1 of 1 treasure scored. Again, tipping off that this is a broader engine that could be used for other things. Gives you your move count, so you can certainly optimize your way through this game if you're trying to maximize your performance in that way. It does turn out to be a strange interdimensional journey just to unlock a desk. But there's a lot of adventure in between, some peril, some dying on a hill because you don't have the right boots.
Well, I'm halfway through. I don't know if you've seen the German time travel series Dark. I'm halfway through season 2, and it fits in with this. There's a lot of traveling about through time and space to do something very, very simple. So it ties in. It ties in with that. I found this. I was reminded. This one didn't feel like much fun. There didn't feel like much character in there. It felt like you go here, pick up this, move there. I didn't get the sense of story, which I think the next game it certainly has more of for a couple of glaringly obvious reasons. But this felt like you were just following a series of instructions, and I know it's time machines and all of that, but it didn't grab me as a story. I didn't feel pulled in to the adventure with this.
I think that's a fair comment. I mean, it wasn't just that. I mean, I found there were certain areas, for example, the trader. When you come across Trader Jack, there was no real evidence of what you could trade and what you couldn't. You just kind of randomly gave him something, and he said, "Thanks, mate," and take what you want. And again, that wasn't particularly good storytelling. So I think you really have kind of hit on a good point there.
Did you find it? But I'll ask both of you. Did you find it fun? Did you have fun playing this game?
I honestly did. I was
Okay.
glad to be turned on to this one, and because I'd never seen it before. The charmingly odd CGA palette and the animated graphics. To me, I agree. This is not a story-rich game, although there are there's enough information about the eccentric character whose footsteps you're following to get a sense for what he was about and his ability to build a teleportation machine. I did have fun. Yes, it's definitely a grind, moving objects, across the world four at a time. Yes, there are definitely puzzles that you're going to need to solve by, well, I'll see if I can trade this and what the best object is to get. But overall, I thought this was a decent puzzler in the early 80s tradition, and I was glad to have a chance to play it.
Dave, did you have fun?
I, I don't think I quite liked it as much as Jason did. I mean, I will say that I did actually quite like the use of the graphics, which is fairly unusual because generally I find they sort of either get in the way if you're trying to have this. We've discussed this many times on the show where when you actually see puzzles that are reflected purely in the graphics, I find that kind of annoying. I like the text. I like to read text, but I felt the way that they actually had used the graphics with animated clouds and the ticking of the clock, that actually did draw me in. I found some of it frustrating, like you said, the limits that we've talked about. And as the game is sort of fairly small, there was a lot of going backwards and forwards. So I'm like Jason, I'm glad I played it. I probably wouldn't play it again. That would be my overall take on it.
It's interesting you mentioned the graphics, and actually I'm looking down at my Mister, and I could probably get the Dragon version on my Mister because I think the files are out there, and I might actually give that a go. I don't like text adventures with graphics. I never have. It feels different to me. Things I had a BBC after the Dragon. I really went for the good computers. And things like Twin Kingdom Valley, it took something away from me. And I think it's the difference between reading a book and watching a film. I like to imagine it all going on in my head. I like to create the world. And if I see it in something like this or Twin Kingdom Valley, I go, no, that's not. It's like, listen, Jason, I'm seeing your face for the first time and you don't look anything like how I imagined. And I'm not seeing Dave's face. And to a certain extent, I think I kind of prefer the mystery. What does Dave... I've got this picture in my head, which probably doesn't tally. But I like that. And I'm the same with text adventures. I want a black screen or a green screen with words, and that's it. That's what draws me in with these things, I think.
I think I will admit. I mean, if you've got a really well-written text adventure, almost as if you're reading or playing a novel, then yes, it will definitely draw you in. Unfortunately, I think we'll find that by the sort of the early ages, and particularly after The Hobbit, everybody wanted images in games. It just became sort of the industry standard. And we have talked about this before in previous episodes that, I mean, in the US, there was a graphic in pretty much every single location, wasn't it, Jason? I mean, that was just standard.
Yeah, I mean, when you got graphical adventures in the U.S., the standard was that each location would have its own unique graphic, which is a distinction that shows up in UK games for sure.
So, what would your take be then, Jason? At the end of it, should people play it?
I do think that if you like a straightforward puzzler, I think that it's approachable enough in that the game world is pretty small to at least check it out. And if you're anything like me and you kind of had that Apple bias in your text adventure upbringing, I do think having a look at this. No, would I replay it? No, there's very little there to replay. But yeah, I was actually really happy to get a chance to play this.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. I am going to go back and play Madness and the Minotaur because I think it was the only video game my sister ever played. She was a few years older than me, and I hear what you say about it getting terrible reviews, but I remember her really playing it, and so I am gonna dig that out on the Mister actually and go for that migraine-inducing green screen. But I'm really grateful you picked this one because again, this brought back a lot of lovely memories of lying on the floor in the living room using the big telly. We got to use the big telly sometimes. So thank you for bringing this up.
Oh,
thank you.
Don't let us put you off playing any game at all. If we say that it's got bad reviews, there's no reason you shouldn't play it.
It's definitely a game for me if it's got bad reviews.
We're here with media professional Iain Lee. He was just giving me some free image advice since he has literally 500,000 times more experience in professional media than I do. So we'll definitely keep that camera off next time.
No, not at all. Listen, you're a wonderful looking human being.
Aww.
I do like the fact that you called me a professional, because there's absolutely nothing. It's been luck and puff and bluster that's kept me going the last 20 odd years.
None of which is incompatible with being a professional. So
There we go. Thank you.
congratulations to you and to us for moving on to our main course, Board of the Rings. Now, I need to peel back the curtain a little bit, Iain. When we started this podcast, we started working on it in December 2023.
Yeah.
And we sat down and we started the core organizational tool of low-budget projects in the 21st century, have a Google Docs spreadsheet, and started loading in games that kind of fit each of these categories. And I put down Board of the Rings, and I put a note that was something along the lines of, we're going to have to cover it sometime. And so when I knew that you had suggested, I'm like, you know what? Having Iain Lee on is a perfect excuse to take a look at Board of the Rings, published by CRL and Delta 4 on Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, and BBC Micro.
And we can also shift the blame.
Also can shift the, yeah, it was a great reason
Send
to do
all
so.
your hate mail to me, dear listener. I can take it.
So what I find fascinating about doing a game called Board of the Rings, published in 1985 in 2025, is that sense of haven't we just been Tolkien to death? You can say that that's kind of been a constant drumbeat for even its inspiration. This is not an officially licensed game adaptation of the Harvard Lampoon Board of the Rings from the late 1960s.
Yeah.
So just wrap your heads around that. Tolkien's books come out, get published internationally. It's 1969 when Harvard Lampoon is saying we have had enough of this. And fast forward to the mid 80s, and because you get the animations, the books are still growing. Obviously, The Hobbit, puts the books in, the game puts the books in many kids' hands, myself included. And again, we could say, we're so tired of this. Fast forward again. So this has been a cultural phenomenon that has spanned, literally 55 years of just being overdone with The Hobbit, with the Tolkien world. I played the BBC Micro version, which, back to our conversation about graphics or not, did not have any graphics. Some variants do have some illustrations. What did you two play?
Well, I grew up playing the BBC version. I didn't play it. I watched a playthrough, and I didn't realise there was a book, Board of the Rings, a spoof book, until I was doing some digging for this. So it's based on a book that's based on a book. And I had never read Lord of the Rings, and I got Board of the Rings because the cover looked good. I'd read The Hobbit when I was about 9. And I'd loved that. And I saw I had, again, an official copy of this. I had so many hooky tapes. I'm surprised both games were official. I remember it came in a clamshell case, and it's that lovely picture. It was yawning on the front. But I'd never read Lord of the Rings, so I didn't get most of the references. And this one was a slog to play as a youngster. I never got very, very far in it. But it was the BBC version I played, and the walkthrough I watched was the BBC version again.
Okay, well, I played on the ZX Spectrum. I do actually have a question for both of you here, since you played the BBC version. The Spectrum version actually came on 3 tapes. Is the BBC a complete version, or was that also on separate tapes or discs?
It looked like I was playing an emulated disc, so it prompted you to load parts 1, part 2, part 3, or the little tape magazine, but looked like that was a disc image.
It was one cassette. I remember it being one cassette, and you had to. So it would have been 2 parts on one side, I think, and 2 parts on the other side.
Right. Well, I have to be completely open here and say that I didn't actually get to finish this game, partly because of the randomness. I don't know how you guys felt. Well, let's go. Iain, how did you do?
Well, I want to ask why. I'm intrigued by this note on your Google Doc. We'll have to deal with it at some point. Or why? What was your relationship with it? And why the hesitancy?
Over to you, Jason.
Yeah, so like we've talked about, there's a fairly significant difference between the US and the UK text adventure market. Although there were budget titles, both US produced and UK produced, that would get sold in the US. Things were by and large dominated by the more flashy, splashy, either licensed works or, big budget, polished works from Infocom and Sierra and things like that. Whereas, and I think in a lot of ways, Board of the Rings is really credited with kicking it off, there's this whole subgenre of tongue-in-cheek, heavily tongue-in-cheek parody games in the UK single tape load market that stretches from the early 80s well into the 90s. And so not being immersed in that, when I've come across the parody games, I've just sort of been like, okay, this is fine. But and I'm not like, I enjoy a send up game. Mystery Science Theater 3000 Detective from 1996 is honestly just one of my favorite games ever, where somebody took a bad text adventure and gave it the Mystery Science Theater
Oh,
treatment.
wow.
It's a
Okay.
great game. So
Yeah.
I don't mind things that are send ups. Pick up the phone booth and die, which is a puzzle on a one room, or a parody on a one room puzzle game. I enjoy very much. But something about I don't know, the laddish tongue-in-cheek commercial games doesn't touch me directly as like, oh yeah, this is a thing to really embrace. So that's why I gave it the eye roll.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to, because I know that it's a significant game and got a lot of people interested in playing text adventures and developing games like it. But for me, it doesn't touch the heart so much.
A problem with a game like this is the if you're and I've said before, and I'm not embarrassed by this. I'm not very good at text adventures because I can't really do those kind of puzzles. But I would still enjoy loading it up and going, right, well, let's see how far we can get today. I'd never play through in one go. I'd do a bit and go, right, that was enough. Let's go and play Elite. The problem with doing that with a game like this is the kind of jokes in inverted commas, it wears thin quite quickly. That style, you're right, that slightly laddish early mid-80s humor, it's there's too many winks to the camera, there's too much tongue in the cheek. It wears thin, I think, the comedy.
I think that's very true, actually. And to be honest, I mean, even when I was a kid, and I think I'm a little bit older than you are, so I'd have been probably about 13 when I played this. And even then, I found some of the humour to be quite puerile. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, the Dark Rider farting, for example.
Jason's laughing at that bit.
I am, and I'm going to talk about this some more. And because what are you going to do? Like, but you finish your thought, Dave, and then I'll give, as though people don't know, I will give the setup for this adventure, this 3-part epic.
No, I'll tell you what. Before I carry on, you give the setup, and then we'll go into the game proper.
Sure. So this game was, because it became such a phenomenon, it was released in multiple different packagings. Honestly, I think the best one to look at is the original Delta 4 release, which has this nice little typewritten booklet. So I'll just give you the prologue concerning Boggets. This game is predominantly concerned with two things: Boggets and the making of money. Of Boggets, little is to be said. They are little people, smaller than the bearded dwarfs, but every bit as disgusting. Of the making of money, such much could be told. As greedy, satirical, social outcasts, we at Delta 4 decided to write the once and for all best adventure game in the world, Lord of the Rings. Sadly, the rights were sold to somebody else, so we did this game instead. Before all you Tolkien-esque fantasy lovers start jamming our phone line with protest, let me say that I am a great admirer of J.R.R.T., who I believe to be one of the best fantasy writers of all time. This game is not supposed to detract from his works in any way. So, making clear that we're going to do this side-eye view on the Lord of the Rings quest, in which, yes, the Frodo analog is at a party where the Bilbo analog shows up and blows an enormous fart and destroys the party.
Funny you read in that booklet. I remember that. My version had a booklet. It came in this beautiful clamshell case. And do you know what? I'm probably going to look on eBay and see if I can buy a copy of it. I like to have the tactile thing of owning some of the cassettes that I used to own. You reading that, suddenly, I think I was about 13 or 14, Dave, when I was playing this. And suddenly I'm back in my bedroom at my desk with the colour portable and the BBC, and I'm reading that for the 100th time as the game loads up. That was proper time travel then.
Oh, wow. Well, glad to have been of service.
Yeah.
But I laughed when the farting was first mentioned, because I had a little tip off that entering naughty words would result in some mirth, and so one of the first things I did, entered fart. And I do like this bit of writing, I have to admit. It simply says, Fordo did, you are Fordo in this game, Fordo did, everyone died. But then it said that my score was 255 points, and I hadn't done anything. So this is probably an 8-bit overflow issue. But I like the idea that the way to maximize your score in this game is to just fart on move one.
I'm kidding
Whether that's
everybody.
intentional or not, I think it's a good outcome for the game.
It was always a fun thing with these games, typing in swear words. When you get frustrated, I can't be the only one that would chuck all of the bombs at it, can I? That was one of the first things
Oh
I
yeah,
do.
because you want to see how the game is going to respond.
Yeah.
And in the future, Dave and I talk about the fact that, again, in the UK market, there seemed to be a move towards like what the most extreme result that the game could give you would be. In the future, we talk about a game that actually terminates itself if you throw too many swear words at it. Yeah.
You get some po-face games that will go, I don't understand that. I can't do that to myself. And
Which
you
is
think,
another
come
way to
on,
approach it, right.
lighten up a little bit.
But yes, so you travel through the lands of Dormore and Rivendell with the likes of Spam, Pimply, and Murky. So there's a lot of that going on. It is a 3-part game, as we mentioned, because it's all memory resident. With graphics only in some of the versions. Dave, you said you played Spectrum, so you did have the interstitial graphics, right?
I did have graphics, although to be fair, most of them were repeated continuously. For example, when you were lost in the forest, and slightly annoyingly, it would stop and redraw the forest every single move.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of an unwelcome addition. That's just by and by, and that's obviously me, but. Because this was actually written on the Quill, this would have been using the Illustrator add-on, and the Illustrator was a lot slower than the core version that came afterwards. I think it's also worth mentioning, Jason, as well, that this was Fergus McNeil, who went on to write some true classics. So I think this may have been one of his first.
I think that's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just sort of a point that I remember he wrote a kind of Sam Spade style game as well.
Big Sleaze, yeah.
Yes, the Big Sleaze, which was incredibly well received. So I think maybe this was sort of just a kind of almost a learning curve for him. But yeah, graphics. One of the things I did note here is that in many cases graphics were also a parody of The Hobbit. Yeah. The Hobbit hold is almost identical. You're missing the chest in the first screen, but it is an almost identical thing. You've got things that look like the Lone Lands, and the actual graphical style is very much like The Hobbit. So that was obviously part of the intent. But apart from that, I actually thought the text was certainly a more important part of it, which, again, in the future, we'll be talking about how certain games, the graphics have more of an influence over the text. And I think this is one of the few that we've played where it's actually the reverse.
So we've talked about the joy of 255 points of farting. I'll just say what the one that, and this was in part one, so I'd already seen some of the parody names, but when I'm laughing just thinking about it, when sorry, I can't get it out. When Smelrond the Lunchmaker showed up, I'm like, all right, that got me. I don't know why. I like it. I like it as that's the diss, that he's the Lunchmaker.
Some of it is very, very clever, right? I'm just thinking about, I can't imagine playing a text adventure, a typing game on a Spectrum rubber keyboard. Oh my God, that would just be, I'm a big fan of the Spectrum, but those keys were awful. You needed, I feel, a BBC, or you needed a micro with proper keys. Some of it is very funny, and some of it is very clever, and they've clearly put a lot of time and effort into this and crafted something that was special. And you're right, this game was huge, I seem to remember. I remember a lot of conversations about it in the playground. I remember I had the original, I said, running off copies for other people to go and play.
There's no statue on Piracy, just one.
Oh, come on, guys! Let's. I own all of the ROMs. The 80s were. How did Games Company make any money? Because once they introduced the tape to tape, that was it. That was it.
Well, it was when Boots started doing 15-minute tapes. What were they for?
Yeah, naughty. But it was a huge game, and again, going back to what we were saying at the start, it feels wild to me to remember that a text adventure. And we would play again at the school. Of course, we had BBC Micros. We would load this up to play in lunch break, and I think you get like 30 minutes in the computer. Then you had to go, and the next shift came in. 30 minutes for a text adventure when you're loading it up and playing it. It's not a lot of time, but we would still do it. And I remember doing it with this game a lot.
Yeah, it probably lost a good 5 minutes to the initial load, right?
Yes, of course. And then if it didn't work, you'd have to go back and do it again. So it just seems wild to me to remember, actually, and this conversation is prompting a lot of it, how big this game in particular was, how popular it was. We were 13-year-old lads. Of course, we're going to laugh at farts.
Yep. So we talked a little bit about how like the graphics are clear callbacks to the Hobbit text adventure, and some of the way the world works is like it does not have the send up of the randomness of the companions, but it does sort of builds the fellowship. So it goes from at this point Fordo noticed Spam, Pimply, Murky, and then some others get added onto that, and he does eventually just say, and then the company appeared. So once it starts getting to the point that it would be scrolling off, they mercifully take that full list away, but it still will eat up pages with Aragorn constantly boasting. What it does have in common with The Hobbit, it does not have the NPCs running around, but as Dave mentioned, there are a lot of random bad things that can happen. You can be picked up by the Dark Riders. You can wander into the wrong place. So it's a challenging game to get through, even if you know what you're doing, so to speak. And then there's the question of what actually are you doing? I've come to the conclusion that this is actually a very forward-looking, almost modern game because there's almost no puzzles to it. I mean, really, in part one, there's kind of only one puzzle. It's dropping the pepper to blow your hole through the wall. Instead, it is a game about wandering through the landscape and experiencing the storytelling, which in this case is a lot of, pastiche and parody and, wordplay and riffs and things like that, which is very much a part of the 21st century interactive fiction scene. Honestly, both parser-based and multiple choice. So in that sense, where it's using the text adventure not to be a puzzle delivery system, which is much more what Calixto Island is, like we said, fairly light on story. This is about being immersed in, Fergus McNeil's parodic writing in the Tolkien universe.
I was surprised watching the walkthrough at that. I'd remembered it being more complicated, but this is a million years ago, and I was surprised that it is more of a novel. It was, there's lots of moving around, and in the first section, like you said, I think one puzzle. So that surprised me a lot, actually. Also, I was surprised at how short it was. Even all of the sections put together, I thought it was really, really short. Again, in my head, I imagined this sprawling 5-hour romp, and actually, it's kind of brief.
The critical path is, there is a lot of wandering around to kind of figure out where you will and won't die.
Yes.
But once you've got the critical path, not too deep of a game. Dave, any thoughts particularly on part one before we move on to the later sections?
Most of the notes that I actually had, I agree with you what you said about there really only being one kind of puzzle in part one. I was vaguely amused, but also slightly frustrated with the simple fact that the mazes weren't even really mazes, that you would wander around in random directions until you'd move so often and then say, oh, okay, you've arrived. Yeah. There was literally no way of mapping that.
Yeah, it felt that way. And as a sidebar, because this is a Quill game, I discovered, I think it was linked off of Solution Archive, there are breakdowns of the Quill file. It's a site called Quill Adventure Guides. So you can see all of the ways that the different rooms were coded, items, how they interact, the different fun, naughty words it's looking for, which in a way was more fun for me than exploring the world. Smell around the lunch maker notwithstanding, was knowing that there are these tools out there to pull apart a Quill game, which, although it can be deep in some ways, is not the most complex thing. It's not like digging through machine language code or ZIL from an Infocom game or something like that. So I will link to those in the show notes because those are kind of fun to pick through and see the little in-jokes that are even embedded in the code without any obvious way to pull them out of the parser.
I think it was actually possible with the Quill to just simply load a game back into the Quill. I think you could just literally reverse engineer it.
So
it would just come in.
Explore that interface. Yeah, it's a little more comfortable to do it in a browser, but yeah, if you could definitely edit it in the Quill editor, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, part two. This was just a personal note for me because we find ourselves in the lands of Morona. Now, I live near a suburb named Monona, so every time I would see the morons of Morona being chided, I'm like, no, they're nice people over there in Monona. So, but that's strictly me. Yeah, we quickly get into disintegrator rifles and offices. I had bad flashbacks to episode one, The Pawn. We're bored with our core premise already, and we're bleeding out into the real world. There are some unkind things said about some 80s music groups, some typos, the epitome of evil. There's a puzzle involving a raft. I thought it was a curious choice that inflating the raft was actually like an enter and go and start sailing move. Uh, there's a reuse of the password to get to part three, which actually I thought was a fun little in joke. But yeah, that part two, again, we're bleeding into the real world a little bit more in the way of puzzles, but mostly on accumulating the score and optimizing your moves through it. Any particular notes from you guys on the middle section?
I will actually say that you're talking about the password. First of all, when I was playing, I accidentally loaded the second part first. And then it came up saying, type your password and you only get one chance. I didn't know what the password was. I typed something in, it crashed. It just literally wiped it from memory. The second time I came through, I thought, okay, I know what the password is. And it turned out to be case sensitive and it crashed. It just wiped it from memory.
Brutal.
So
How did that go at lunchtime, Ian?
So the third time round, which I thought was a little harsh, to be honest.
Yeah.
But games were brutal back then. Kids these days have got no idea with their cheat. That's partly why I loved stuff like this, because it was brutal. You mess up the password, boom, you're out. Get out of town. But honestly, by the end of part two, I was kind of I got the joke. I was finding it all a little bit okay. I understand where the humor is. I think I got it. And I did get to the second part back in the day. I don't remember going to part three, and I wonder if at that point I got bored as a teenager and went, I feel I've kind of seen this now.
I think that's a valid point. I mean, I actually didn't get to part three, even with the playthrough, simply because I ran out of time. But as you say, I mean, I had this and I played it again on the Spectrum and suffering little rubber key presses. But I think I got about halfway through part two and I stopped. And I don't know whether it's because eventually the humour, I mean, in the playthrough, it drifted too far away from the central story. And if you're going to make a parody, you should really try and stick with what you're actually trying to parody rather than saying, okay, like Jason said, oh, let's introduce a disintegrator rifle or the coin-operated machines or batteries. And I think maybe that the game could have maintained the humour more if it had tried to stick more strictly to the actual original story. I mean, that's just my opinion. Any thoughts, guys?
My thought is that we're in this now and we're going to go on to part three.
Okay. Well, as I didn't play it, I'm going to let you two talk about part three.
I was making cups of tea while part three was playing on YouTube. So, Jason, it looks like it's a solo mission for you.
But you're staying. Part three starts to get more sparse, but there are some bright spots.
Right.
I was able to take some notes. I was like, okay, when the basilisk turns up, things went cementish, the way it describes as the basilisk turns things to stone. I thought that was a nice touch. But yeah, this was where I started to make a note. Kind of modern, light on puzzles, long on descriptive text. A cousin to a mind forever voyaging, which is a weird thought to pair these things two together. But that also was Infocom experimenting with form and more story, less puzzles. Gollum or Goldbum starts showing up and ranting and raving. I got a good laugh out of the Tower of Dares No Cure. As I looked at it first, I'm like, oh, this is some and then I spoke it out and I said, okay, very good, very good. There's a programmer's prison. Again, we're doing this. And the final puzzle is one of those, what is this object in the world? We're going to give you kind of minimal information about it and let you piece it together. It is a microwave, and it is a microwave that hot new appliance of the mid-1980s. That is the thing powerful enough to destroy the One Ring.
There you go. That's a good summary there.
Yeah, and then the quote unquote fourth part is a cute little teletext style
Oh,
disc
that
magazine.
bit was fun. I don't remember if I saw that back in the day, but I had great fun. Again, was watching it on YouTube, and that really made me laugh. I thought that was really clever. You know, we didn't have teletext on our telly. We couldn't get it for some reason. So again, it's impossible to tell kids. Oh yeah, what you do is you go around a mate's house and press a button, and these words would come up, but then you had to wait for the page to get to the number that you. No, I loved that. I thought this was so funny and so a real time capsule of the period. This made the entire thing for me, actually.
Yeah, and America, we were deprived. We never had true teletext. There would be overnight television services that would try to kind of emulate it, but it was not a selectable page system. So they'd use kind of
Wow.
the text format. Yeah, we did not. They didn't find the bandwidth in the NTSC signal or whatever. I think there were some attempts, but never caught on.
Isn't that interesting? I'd always assumed you had. I know, ever such a slight tangent, that there are lost archive collectors, found footage, that's what I mean, who you can extract the teletext signal from VHS tapes. So someone's taped Ghostbusters 2, they can, it's kind of at the bottom of the picture or something, they can extract the teletext, which I find, I can't even understand how that is possible, but I love it. There's a DVD, look around you, an old comedy series, and one of the DVD extras is loads of teletext stuff. And I thought it was really well written. Thought it was funny. I thought they were good gags. It was written with affection. I really enjoyed this bit.
I think the question to ask, because we all had the experience of going through this and saying, okay, I think we get the joke, but. As mentioned, Fergus McNeil goes on to make other tongue-in-cheek games. It becomes, quite a little thriving industry of its own. So, what do you think it was about this kind of parody, tongue-in-cheek text adventure that kept people coming back, even if some of them would lose steam? Was it the promise that the next one would be better, would get us further, or just because it was a new take on a familiar property?
I've got some thoughts. Do you want to go first, Dave?
I think at the time, I mean, we're still talking about a fairly early game really here. And a lot of the games here, they were trying to emulate things like Colossal Cave still, or the Scott Adams series. And they were fairly straightforward, non-comical games, although some of them have a little bit of humor. I think that the Fergus McNeil stuff were the first games really to out and out try to do something that was genuine comedy. And I think that's what it was drawing people in the simple fact that it was unusual and it was different. And it was just a new take, really, on genre.
I think you make a lot of sense. I'm kind of seeing it in the historical context of where we were. And I think it was a lot of, I don't buy into that thing that girls don't play games. Of course they do. I do think this was a game aimed at 12, 13, 14-year-old boys specifically. And also, at the time that we would have been playing this, I remember they were repeating Monty Python. It was like 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, and all of my friends and I were taping Monty Python. And it was huge, It was such a big program, and we'd go around and watch them. Sometimes we were allowed to watch them in school if you had like a study period. And I think it ties in with that. It's 12, 13, 14-year-old boys primarily discovering humor, discovering that you can be rude, discovering surrealism. And I think those two things kind of combine. So this game fits in perfectly with that Monty Python, slightly naughty, slightly rude, it's got farts in it kind of vibe. And I think that's why this game perhaps did so well at that period in time in the UK.
I think you could be right there, actually. I mean, it was of the time as well. And it was also a time, I'm not just talking about this kind of thing. You had similar games with things like Not 9 O'Clock News, which was a kind of similar show, that kind of almost stand-up sketches at the same time. And I think these kind of games did actually work into that. And they did actually reflect a lot of that style and that kind of humor. So, yeah, I think that's possibly true. Certainly why it did so well in the UK. I've no idea how well it did in Europe, although the Germans have a very similar sense of humour. So I'd imagine if there were German translations, or even because I know that most Germans speak fluent English, and Germany does have quite a big text adventure market. So I'd be interested to find out actually how well it did. Was it released in Europe, and what effect that had?
I'll do
The
that quick little research and throw that in the show notes. Ian,
Yes.
sorry, I thought you were about to say
No, no,
something.
no, no, no. I'm wondering if you were typing away furiously and you could come back with the stats on Germany, but no. I was looking with anticipation.
We're going to find out any second now.
But you're right, Dave. Not the night. Also, of course, the young ones would have been around then. Comedy was very, very naughty then, or maybe it always has been. But as teenagers, we were discovering it for ourselves, and this really does fit in with that naughtiness. Don't tell your parents, that kind of vibe that we had.
Well, I mean, you're certainly right. I mean, comedy's always had a sort of a slightly naughty bent, but I mean, particularly that period. I mean, like you say, the young ones is a good example. But all of the shows were kind of aimed pretty much at young boys then. I mean, from sort of 1980 to maybe 1986, they were all in that kind of vein.
Yeah, there was a lot of that. The early 80s were grubby, I can say. Very grubby.
Well, you got to remember when we were coming out of the 70s, we're coming out of punk. I mean, like I said, young ones always had a band on.
Yeah, the young ones I always thought was like the Monkees for the 80s. They're very, very similar characteristics, and they had a song every week. So
They really did. Yeah, I'd actually forgotten that, but yeah, no, it is a really good point. So maybe that's it.
The only adventure game I ever tried to write was using Graphical Adventure Creator.
Oh yeah,
and I was obsessed
software.
with the Monkees, and it was a game set in the Monkees pad, and Mike had lost his guitar, and I didn't get very far with it. It's not a particularly exciting concept for a game.
There have been worse.
Yeah, well, yeah.
One of the things I would say about Lord of the Rings actually is I made a note here on my paper here that. Despite everything, I actually still think the Lord of the Rings was a better game than the official Lord of the Rings version from Melbourne House.
Really? Why?
Mainly because, I mean, the Lord of the Rings was so strange. I mean, the one thing that straight away put me off with it is you start off the game of Lord of the Rings, and on the board, he's got photographs. There's no cameras in Tolkien. There's literally no evidence of that. And it ruined the entire atmosphere for me from the word go. The only thing I would say about the Lord of the Rings game, and I've only ever managed to do it once, is it is possible to turn the Council of Elrond into a brawl, which was quite fun. And if you get everybody fighting, Elrond says, well, that's that then.
So, by the way, I'm not finding any translated versions of Lord of the Rings. I do find a German language review of it, but since they're listing the publisher as just being Delta 4 in England, I suspect they were just reviewing the English version.
Yeah.
Okay, but so it was obviously what's played over there then.
Yeah. Yeah, I would expect.
Okay, any final thoughts from anyone? Ian?
No, I guess my final thoughts on both of these games is we talk about time travel. It's time travel, thinking about these games, watching it on YouTube. Actually, more importantly, talking to you guys about it. I can remember being in the playground, lending the cassette to a friend of mine, taking it out of my bag and giving it. I can remember being in my bedroom. And I remember what the button on the portable TV felt like pressing it. And it's because we're talking about these wonderful, weird, odd games. And I just want to thank you for, first of all, letting me come on. And I don't know if what I've said has been any use whatsoever. I'll listen to it and you'll have cut me out. And that's fine. But also for helping me remember a really important, confusing, fun, weird time in my life when I was a teenage boy, and how important these games were as part of my identity and part of me growing up. So thank you for that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
You're more than welcome. Jason, any thoughts?
No, I thank you both. And, for me, Ian, I use the show for both that, kind of re-experiencing games that I'd played, 35, 40 years ago, but also having the excuse to play something that has been on my radar. I've known about this game probably since the mid-90s, when the internet let us learn things we were never meant to know about what goes on in other nations and other computing cultures. But I'm able to experience these games for the first time, having a friend or two along to experience them with and discuss. So I'm glad for both sides of that equation. So So really appreciate you suggesting it. Glad to Dave for sticking with the show for this long. Appreciate everything that you've contributed to helping people know about the Retro Adventurers. Suggest that people follow you, Iain Lee, IAINLEE.com. Good follow on Blue Sky as well.
Yeah.
Random Access Memories, as mentioned, that's sort of a usual, sometimes weekly-ish podcast. Is that the format?
I kind of do it when I did loads last year, and then suddenly it became a bit of a chore, and I thought, I'm not enjoying this, I'm just going to stop. And then earlier this year, I thought, I fancy doing it again. So at the moment, they're going out every week, and I do it, when I've got someone I want to talk to, and I feel like it. And it's nice. People pick a retro video game. The term retro is very, very loose, and we don't really talk about it. We just talk about life, and then maybe we mention the game at the end. But I'm enjoying meeting so many lovely people, yourselves included, in the retro community. It's really nice. So I'm really grateful you asked me on. Thank you, guys.
So more than welcome, and thank you for joining us.
All right, so for Iain and Dave, this is Jason Compton signing off from another adventure with the Retro Adventurers. You've been listening to The Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic text adventure games. This episode was produced by Dave Hawkins and Jason Compton, with editing by Jason Compton. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, including Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Podcast Addict. Visit us at retroadventurers.com and follow us on Facebook and Blue Sky. The Retro Adventurers is based on a format originally devised by Ben Collier, Jason Compton, and Dave Hawkins.